Hi everybody, in this video I'm going to explain about an event called the Great Depression, and this is something that happened between 1929 and 1939, and particularly I'm going to talk about the US policy response to this, what they did about this to try and improve the situation. This was a global recession, and it's something that you need to know about on the specification so that you can talk about the policy response in the US, and you'll see later that we also look at the financial crisis from 2008 and what the response was to that. And we can compare the two and look at the differences there. So the Great Depression was a global recession. It affected countries all over the world because of the interconnection of countries. And in fact, in the past, there wasn't as much interconnection as there is today because globalization wasn't in evidence as much. The Great Depression started, the very first thing was what's called the Wall Street crash. And this was where share prices suddenly fell significantly in the US. Because at the time, a lot of people were holding shares in the US, this meant that there was a negative wealth effect. And the negative wealth effect caused consumption to go down. And as a result, this also caused investment to go down by firms. And overall, this led to a decrease in aggregate demand. And this caused many problems in the US, particularly an increase in unemployment. And this was one of the big things about the Great Depression. There was significant unemployment. There was a significant increase in poverty in the US. And it's argued that the policy that the US government used actually made the problems worse. So the policy exacerbated or made worse the problems. And the first thing, one of the sort of smaller problems, is that they had an increase in protectionism. And this increase in protectionism, so having more tariffs and more quotas on things coming into the US, was to protect US industry and jobs. But as a result of this, other countries did the same thing. They said, if the US isn't going to buy our products, then we won't buy theirs. And this resulted in trade wars and generally an increased protectionism around the world. So there was less trade going on, and this led to a decrease in production or output in the US. So again, this caused aggregate demand to go down, unemployment to go up. The other bigger problem was that at the time, the government thought that a balanced budget, that's government spending being equal to tax revenue, was extremely important. And as a result of this, they really thought that they needed to cut down on the amount of government spending, and they needed to increase tax revenue in order to be able to get a balanced budget. And in 1930, the president at the time, President Hoover, he ran a budget surplus. So that means that government spending was less than the tax revenue being collected. So you can imagine that this decreased aggregate demand. And this arguably made the recession much worse. Also, from 1931 to 1932, there was very weak expansionary policy. So the government wasn't increasing government spending a lot. They weren't decreasing interest rates. And arguably, this made everything much worse. Another thing that was being done, number 5, was that the rate of interest in the US was increased to try and maintain the value of the dollar. And this also led to a decrease in the money supply. These things we can see here. If the rate of interest goes up, this will cause consumption to go down. It will cause investment to go down. If there's less money circulating, then equally we will have less money being spent. So again, this all exacerbated the problem. What then happened was that Roosevelt introduced the New Deal. And the New Deal was about much more spending by the government. So this was expansionary fiscal policy. And it was at this point, when this was introduced from 1933 to 1939, that things started to improve. And some people think that it was the New Deal that got the US out of the Depression and also helped the Depression end globally. Some people also think it wasn't just this expansionary fiscal policy on spending on things like roads and dams and other things. It was more to do with spending on World War II. So this is another possible reason, because World War II started in 1939. The final thing that happened, but this isn't on the specification, is that the US left the gold standard, and this caused the money supply to go up, which meant that there could be more spending within the US. However, the final point in this is actually we ended back in another recession, 1937, 1938. Recession started again, and this was because the government in the US were worried about the fiscal situation. They were worried that government spending had gone too high, and they were worried that tax revenue was too low. So arguably they then put the economy back into another difficult situation and entered recession again.